I had always been drawn to the dark corners of the world, the abandoned places where shadows whispered secrets, and the past lingered like a thick fog. So when I got the call to investigate a noise complaint at the infamous Cranbrook Mental Hospital, I felt a thrill run down my spine. This wasn't just any old building. It was a place that had housed countless souls, tormented by their own minds. The locals in Cranbrook whispered tales of the patients who never left, their spirits bound to the decaying structure by their suffering. It was a cold November night, and the wind howled through the trees like a mournful specter. My partner, Officer Davis, and I parked our cruiser in front of the asylum. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the crumbling facade. As we stepped out, a shiver coursed through me, not just from the cold, but from the oppressive atmosphere surrounding the hospital. It felt as if the very air was charged with an unspeakable dread. We approached the main entrance, our flashlights flickering as they illuminated the rusty door. The wind howled again, and I could have sworn I heard faint screams carried on its breath. Davis hesitated, glancing at me, his eyes reflecting the unease that settled like a weight in my chest. "You ready for this?" he asked, attempting a casual tone that belied the tension in his voice. "Let's just get it over with," I replied, trying to sound brave. We pushed open the door, and the creaking sound echoed through the cavernous hallway, an unsettling welcome from the building. The stale air hit us like a wall, filled with the scent of mildew and decay. As we moved deeper into the asylum, the temperature dropped, each step becoming heavier, as if the very ground was trying to hold us back. Our flashlights danced across the walls, revealing peeling paint and rusted medical equipment, remnants of a time long gone. "This place gives me the creeps," Davis muttered, breaking the suffocating silence. I nodded, aware that the stories we had heard were more than just local lore. This was the site of unimaginable suffering. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream sliced through the silence, sending shockwaves through my body. It echoed down the corridor, reverberating in the very bones of the asylum. Davis and I exchanged horrified glances, our instincts screaming for us to run, but duty held us in place. "We have to check it out," I urged, my voice barely above a whisper. We followed the sound, our hearts pounding in synchrony with each step. It led us to Ward B, the notorious section known for housing the most severe cases. As we reached the heavy metal door, I hesitated. There was a foreboding aura, as if the ward was a beast waiting to be unleashed. But the scream rang out again, more desperate this time, urging us onward. With a deep breath, I pushed open the door, and the hinges screamed in protest. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a room frozen in time. The air was thick with the remnants of despair. And then I saw her, a ghostly apparition standing in the center of the room, clad in a tattered hospital gown. Her eyes glowed with a fiery intensity, piercing through the darkness like twin beacons of torment. I froze, my blood turning to ice. Davis stumbled backward, his flashlight flickering wildly. The woman raised her arms toward us, an ear-piercing wail escaping her lips, a sound so filled with anguish that it felt like it was tearing through the fabric of reality itself. Instinctively, I reached for my radio, my hand shaking uncontrollably. But before I could press the button, she vanished into thin air, leaving behind an empty void. Silence enveloped us, heavy and suffocating. "Did you see that?" Davis gasped, his face pale. I could barely find my voice, the image of the apparition seared into my mind. What the hell just happened? My heart raced, adrenaline pumping through my veins. We searched every corner of Ward B, But the chilling presence of the woman lingered, the air thick with her anguish. We couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, as if countless eyes were bearing down on us, judging our presence in their forsaken home. "We need backup," I finally said, my voice steadying despite the fear coiling in my stomach. Within minutes, the asylum was alive with the glow of flashlights as more officers arrived, their laughter and chatter a stark contrast to the oppressive silence we had just experienced. But the apparition was gone, leaving behind only a lingering sense of dread. I could see it in my colleagues' eyes. Some were skeptical, but others shared a look of unease, as if they too had felt the darkness that resided within the walls of Cranbrook. I overheard whispers about the woman in Ward B, each recounting their own stories of terror and sorrow. As the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had brushed against something far more malevolent than we could understand. The stories began to circle in my mind, tales of patients who had been forgotten, left to suffer alone. Had we interrupted something that was never meant to be disturbed? That night haunted me long after we left the asylum. I couldn't sleep, my dreams filled with the haunting visage of the woman in the tattered gown, her fiery eyes burning into my soul. Some of the officers requested transfers, desperate to escape the memories that clung to them like a shroud. I considered it myself, but couldn't bring myself to leave, not when the weight of that night pressed down on me. In the weeks that followed, I researched the history of Cranbrook Mental Hospital. I discovered the dark truths hidden beneath the surface: abuse, neglect, and countless lives lost to the very system meant to heal them. The stories of the patients echoed in my mind, their cries for help trapped within those walls. I felt a connection to them, an inexplicable pull that drew me back to the asylum time and again. One night, fueled by curiosity and a lingering sense of duty, I returned alone. The air was colder than ever, and the howling wind seemed to carry a chorus of whispers. I stood before Ward B, heart pounding in my chest, and pushed the door open. The room was just as I had left it, cloaked in darkness, but this time I felt a presence, a warmth that enveloped me, almost welcoming. "Show yourself," I called into the abyss, my voice steady. For a moment, there was silence, and then a faint glow appeared in the corner of the room. It flickered and pulsed, growing brighter until I could make out the silhouette of the woman. She was not angry, but filled with sorrow. Her fiery eyes softened, and a sense of peace washed over me. "I'm here," I whispered, tears filling my eyes as I realized the truth. She was not a malevolent spirit. She was a lost soul searching for solace. "You're not alone anymore." As I stepped closer, the apparition reached out, and in that moment, the room filled with light, the shadows retreating. I felt the weight of despair lift, as if she had found her voice and was finally free. The last wail I heard was not one of anguish, but of release, echoing through the halls like a soothing balm. When I left that night, I understood that the spirits of Cranbrook Mental Hospital were not to be feared. They were reminders of a dark history, of lives that mattered, and of the haunting truths we often ignore. Some places hold secrets that bind us, but through compassion and understanding, we can help them find peace. I left the asylum, not as an officer shaken by fear, but as a guardian of stories, a witness to the struggles of souls who would never truly be forgotten. I never believed in ghosts, not until that fateful night on Highway 44 in rural Wyoming. As a state trooper, I thought I had seen it all: drunk drivers, reckless teenagers, and the occasional wild animal crossing the road. But nothing could prepare me for the chilling encounter that would haunt me for the rest of my days. It was a stormy night in late October, and I was partnered with my veteran colleague, Officer Harris. The wind howled outside our cruiser, and rain pounded against the roof, drowning out all sounds except for the intermittent crackle of the radio. We were on our routine patrol, making rounds along the desolate stretch of highway, when a flash of lightning illuminated the road ahead. Just as the thunder rolled, I caught sight of something, a figure standing by the roadside, drenched and shivering. My heart raced. We were miles from the nearest town, and the weather was turning worse by the minute. I squinted through the sheets of rain. It was a young woman, her long dark hair plastered to her face, her thumb extended in the air. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely above the din of the storm. "Yeah, I see her," Harris replied, his brow furrowing. "It's late, and we can't just leave her out here." I nodded, my instincts screaming at me to keep driving, but something about her desperate demeanor tugged at my heart. We pulled over, and I rolled down my window, straining to hear over the rain. "Are you okay, ma'am?" I shouted, trying to be heard above the wind. "Where are you headed on a night like this?" "Casper," she replied, her voice barely a whisper, as if she was afraid of being heard. "My name is Sarah." Harris and I exchanged glances, a silent debate passing between us. We knew the risks, but leaving her here felt wrong. "All right, hop in the back," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Sarah climbed into the back seat, her soaked clothes clinging to her skin. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in my stomach as we resumed our drive down the slick asphalt. The wipers fought against the downpour, but the rain only seemed to intensify. "Are you sure you're okay back there, Sarah?" I asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. She was staring out the window, her gaze lost somewhere in the storm. But when I looked back, the back seat was empty. My heart dropped into my stomach. I slammed on the brakes, the cruiser skidding slightly on the wet pavement. "What the hell?" I exclaimed, spinning around to search the back seat, my pulse racing. "Where did she go?" "She's got to be back there," Harris shouted, his eyes wide with shock. "Check again." I threw open the back door, rain pouring in as I searched frantically, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Panic surged through me, mixing with disbelief. "Did we just pick up a ghost?" I asked, breathless. Harris didn't reply. He was just staring at the empty seat, his face pale. We exchanged confused glances, our earlier confidence shattered. In a daze, we continued down the highway, unable to shake the feeling of unease that hung over us like a dark cloud. Eventually, we pulled into a dimly lit diner, hoping to regain some semblance of normalcy. The flickering neon sign buzzed like a distant warning. As we stepped inside, the warmth of the diner enveloped us, but it did little to ease the chill that had settled in my bones. An old man with kind eyes and a warm smile approached our booth, his apron stained with the day's work. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost," he said, concern etched on his face. I opened my mouth to respond, but Harris beat me to it. "We picked up a hitchhiker," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "A young woman named Sarah. But when we looked in the back seat, she was gone." The diner owner's smile faded, replaced by a look of grim recognition. "Sarah," he whispered, leaning in closer. "Did she mention anything about a car accident about 10 years ago?" A cold wave of dread washed over me, and I felt my blood run cold. We had heard the stories about Highway 44, the phantom hitchhiker, the girl in the white dress, but I had dismissed them as local legends. 10 years ago, the owner continued, his voice low. "There was a terrible accident on this highway. A young woman died right around here. They say she wanders this road, searching for a ride home, but she never reaches her destination." The weight of his words settled heavily in the air, and I felt the walls of the diner close in around me. My heart raced as I recalled the fear in Sarah's eyes, the urgency in her voice. "Are you saying we picked up a ghost?" I asked, incredulously. The owner nodded slowly, his expression somber. "If you see her again, don't let her in. It's said that if you do, you'll never escape her fate." Harris and I exchanged horrified glances, our earlier disbelief crumbling into reality. The diner owner retreated to the kitchen, leaving us in stunned silence. "What do we do now?" I whispered, my mind racing. "First, we get out of here," Harris replied, his voice shaky, "and we never come back to this stretch of highway." As we stood to leave, the diner's door creaked open, and a gust of wind rushed in, carrying with it the sound of a soft, mournful voice. "Please, can you give me a ride?" My blood ran cold as I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. There she was, Sarah, standing just outside the door, her ghostly figure illuminated by the flickering diner sign. She looked just as she had before, wet and shivering, her dark hair hanging limply over her face. "Get in the car!" I shouted at Harris, who was frozen in fear. We rushed out of the diner, scrambling into the cruiser, as Sarah's eyes locked onto mine, pleading and desperate. I turned the key in the ignition, heart pounding as I glanced back. But Sarah was gone, vanished once more into the night. As we sped away from the diner, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had barely escaped something sinister. The storm continued to rage outside, the wind howling as I drove down the highway. I had never believed in ghosts. But now, every time I patrol Highway 44, I keep an eye out for a young woman in a white dress, hoping to never encounter Sarah again. The stories weren't just local legends, they were a warning, and I'd learned the hard way that some roads should remain untraveled. I had been on the force for nearly a decade, but I had never encountered anything like this. It was a sweltering summer night in Louisville, Kentucky, when the call came through. The dispatcher's voice was shaky, the urgency palpable, as she relayed the frantic 911 call from a woman who spoke in a whisper, her words laced with terror. "Objects are flying across the room," she had said. "There's an evil presence here." I exchanged a glance with my partner, Officer Daniels, as we pulled up to the modest two-story house. The exterior looked innocent enough, paint peeling from the shutters, a lawn overrun with weeds, but the oppressive weight in the air told us something was very wrong. As we approached, I felt a chill creep down my spine, despite the heat of the summer night. "Stay sharp," Daniels muttered, his hand hovering near his holster. I nodded, my instincts on high alert. As we stepped inside, the scene before us was chaos incarnate. The living room was in disarray, furniture overturned, lamps shattered on the floor, and picture frames hanging askew, their glass cracked and broken. It looked like a tornado had torn through the place. In the center of the chaos stood a young couple, their faces ghostly pale. The woman gripped her phone like a lifeline, her eyes wide and unblinking, while the man stood protectively in front of her, his gaze darting nervously around the room. "What happened here?" I asked, trying to maintain a calm demeanor in the face of their palpable fear. It's him," the woman stammered, her voice trembling. "He's back." "Who's back?" I pressed, glancing at Daniels, whose brow furrowed in confusion. But before they could respond, a blood-curdling scream ripped through the air. I whirled around just in time to see a heavy antique chair rise from the floor, as if lifted by an invisible hand. It hurtled across the room and smashed against the wall with a sickening thud, mere inches from where we stood. My heart raced, adrenaline surging through my veins as we instinctively drew our weapons. "Show yourself!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the chaotic room. There was no response, only an eerie silence that hung heavily in the air. Suddenly the lights flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the walls. The temperature in the room plummeted, a cold wind whipping through the space, sending shivers down my spine. The bookshelf began to shake violently, and I watched in disbelief as books flew off the shelves, propelled by an unseen force, and slammed into the walls. A vase, filled with flowers, levitated, hovered for a moment, then shattered against the fireplace. The overwhelming sense of dread that gripped my chest told me we were dealing with something far beyond our comprehension. "Back up!" I barked into my radio, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need any available unit at our location. It's urgent." As I spoke, the couple clung to each other, their faces twisted in fear. The atmosphere shifted, the paranormal activity intensifying. Disembodied voices began to whisper our names, the sounds coming from the very walls. It was as if the house itself had come alive, mocking us, challenging us. We had faced dangerous criminals, but this was something else, entirely. "Let's get them out of here," I said, my voice low and steady, though my insides churned with anxiety. We needed to evacuate the terrified couple from this nightmare. As we cautiously made our way down the hallway, the floorboards creaked ominously beneath our feet. I led the way, every sense heightened, the weight of the unseen menace palpable. Suddenly a door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang, causing me to jump. My heart raced as I exchanged a frantic glance with Daniels. "Keep moving," I urged, pushing the couple ahead of us. They stumbled, the woman's breath coming in short gasps. We reached the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in as I pulled on the handle with all my might, but it felt as if something was holding it shut. "Try the windows," Daniels shouted, his voice rising above the chaos. We turned, but before we could reach the nearest window, the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. I felt it wash over me, cold and suffocating. In a moment of desperation, I pulled out my flashlight, illuminating the room. The beam caught a glimpse of a shadow flitting past, a dark figure that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. I blinked, doubting my own eyes. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The couple nodded, terror etched across their faces. "Get away from the windows," I commanded, as another book flew from the shelf, narrowly missing my head. The atmosphere crackled with energy, and the lights flickered again, plunging us into darkness before illuminating the chaos once more. "Help!" the woman screamed, her voice echoing against the walls, the sheer desperation piercing my heart. "We need to regroup," I yelled to Daniels. "Back to the living room." We maneuvered back through the hallway, dodging flying objects, adrenaline fueling our movements. As we reached the living room, the temperature dropped even further, our breath visible in the air. I could feel a presence, something dark and vengeful lingering just beyond our sight. "Keep your eyes open," I shouted, as I scanned the room, my instincts screaming that we weren't alone. Suddenly, the woman gasped, pointing toward the corner. There, partially obscured by shadows, stood a figure, dark, ominous, and watching us. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Get down," I ordered, and we dropped to the floor, just as another piece of furniture flew across the room, crashing into the wall with a deafening bang. "Why are you doing this?" I yelled, the desperation in my voice echoing through the chaos. The figure merely watched, its presence heavy and malevolent. It felt as if it were feeding off our fear, relishing in the chaos it had wrought. "Stay close," I urged, inching toward the couple, who clung to each other like lifelines. Suddenly, The lights flickered one last time, and the house went dark. I felt a rush of cold air swirl around us, followed by a chorus of whispers that enveloped me. My heart raced as I strained to see through the darkness, knowing we had to hold on until backup arrived. But as the whispers crescendoed, I felt a pull, a tug on my very soul that made me want to surrender to the darkness. I gritted my teeth, fighting against it, knowing I had to protect the couple. Then, in an instant, the lights flickered back to life. The figure was gone. The room was still, almost too quiet. I exchanged worried glances with Daniels and the couple. "Is it over?" the man whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. Just then, my radio crackled to life. "Units responding to the disturbance, we're 5 minutes out." Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. As I looked around the room, I knew one thing for certain. We had just scratched the surface of something unfathomable, and whatever had haunted this house was not done with us yet.